Hello learners, welcome to this video lesson. Today we are going to discuss another topic, education and philosophy interrelationships. As you know that presently we are discussing different topics that is included in your course. Course title is BESC 131 and this is the course code, and course title is Education, Concept, Nature and Perspectives. Before starting our discussion, let me to introduce myself. I Dr. Niradharde, Associate Professor, School of Education, Indira Gandhi National Open University. Welcome you all to this video lesson. As you know that presently we are in the 5th module of your course. The title of the module is Education and Philosophy, and in this module two important lessons are there. One is different branches of philosophy that already we have discussed in our last session, and another important lesson from this module, that is education and philosophy, its interrelationships. Now we are going to discuss on this topic. Before starting our discussion, let me to focus upon some of the learning outcomes, and I am very much hopeful that after going through this video lesson and the part content which is there in your module, in the 5th module, you will be able to establish interrelationships between philosophy and education, how philosophy is related with education and how education is related with philosophy. Further, you will be able to discuss interrelationships between philosophy and education on the following aspects, just like philosophy and aims of education, then philosophy and curriculum, philosophy and methods of teaching, then relationships between teachers and learners. So, here how philosophy contributes for setting the aims of education, then how philosophy contributes for designing the curriculum, and further how philosophy contributes for selecting a suitable methods special in the teaching learning process, and how in the teaching learning process how the teachers and students are interrelated with each other. Okay. In different schools of thought, in different schools of philosophy, you will find that the teachers and students relationships are different. So, that is why these are the certain learning outcomes, and I am hopeful that definitely you will achieve these learning outcomes after watching this video, after going through the questions, practice questions that are given in the video lesson, and also after going through the content, the e-content which is given in your module. Now, let us go forward. First, let us try to understand the interrelationship between philosophy and education. We can say that there is supplementary and integral relationship between philosophy and education. Philosophy is the theoretical part of developing knowledge, and education is the practical and action part to implement that knowledge among the students. Try to understand. Here I am saying two important things. First of all, philosophy is the theoretical part, and at the same time education is the action part, or education is the practice part, or education is the practical aspect of the theories which is given by philosophy. So, the principles, the theories, the laws, the concepts which is given by philosophy that are being practiced, that are being functioned in education. When we develop a curriculum as per the aim of education, as per the aim of our life, as per the aim of the entire society, and as per our constitutional you can say aims or the constitutional obligations. Okay? So, that is why philosophy provides us a way and education proceed in that way. So, that is why education is called as a practical discipline or a practical part of the philosophy. Further, philosophy determines the aim of human life, and education plays the role as a mean to achieve those aims. So, philosophy provides us, shows us the aim of our life, what we really want to do, okay, to understand ourselves and accordingly to contribute ourselves. And what education does, education just plays role as a mean to achieve those aims, because to fulfill one's aim of life, one should be educated, one should be undergo with different courses, okay, different programs. So that's why when we design a course, design a program, definitely the aim of our life, the constitutional aim, at the same time the aim of the society are being practiced, are being implemented. So that's why education acts as a tool, education acts as a mean to achieve the aim of life, okay, which is determined by philosophy. Further, philosophy is the thinking process of life, and education is a functional part to materialize the thinking process. Friends, in our last session we are discussing that the very meaning of philosophy is to or we can say that it is the science of wisdom, or it is to impart wisdom. So that's why, friends, wisdom is possible when we involve ourselves in a thinking process, in deep thinking process, and for materializing our thinking process, or whatever new things, new innovations, new ideas we are getting. So education provides us a way to practice those ideas. So that's why philosophy is a thinking process of life, and education is a functional part to materialize the thinking process. And further we can say that philosophy determines the real destination towards which education aims at. What is our way forward, what is our way, in which path we proceed. So that's why philosophy determines the real destination, and to reach at that destination, education helps us. So we set the educational aim to reach at that destination. Further, philosophy determines the goal of life and also provides suitable and effective guidance and supervision for education to achieve those goals. Philosophy provides the principles and theories of learning, whereas education implements those principles and theories in the process of teaching and learning. Try to understand. Further, we will discuss that in different schools of thought, it may be idealism, it may be naturalism, it may be realism, it may be pragmatism, it may be existentialism. You will find that so far as the process of education is concerned, so far as aim of education is concerned, so far as teaching learning process, methods, techniques, teaching strategies and maxims are concerned, it is different so far as in different schools of thought. So here the principles and the theories related to idealistic schools of thought, pragmatic schools of thought and naturalistic schools of thought is given by philosophy. And what education does, education implements those principles and theories in the process of teaching and learning. Further, true education is practicable only by a true philosophy, which is said by Spencer. Okay, a true philosopher can be a true educationist. So that's why a true philosopher can only practice his or her ideas relating to education, and they can bring changes in the system of education, in the practice of education. Further, philosophy determines various aspects of education, like we can say that teaching method as one of the aspects, principles of teaching is another aspect, curriculum, the type of curriculum, the nature of curriculum is also another aspect, and the role of teachers and students as well. So friends, these aspects of education is determined by philosophy, the philosophical ideas. Okay, and education, when we design a curriculum, we determine and we take a decision that what method should be practiced to teach a subject, to deliver a lesson and to transact our curriculum. Further, philosophy and education are like the two sides of the same coin, present different views of the same thing. It may be philosophy or it may be education. Philosophy present it in one way, in a very theoretical way, and education conceptualize it and practice it in a very action oriented way, in a very functional way, in a very practice oriented way, and that is implied by the other. Further, we can also say that the great philosophers are great educationists at all the times. Like we can take the example of the philosophers just like Plato, Dewey, Rousseau, Gandhiji, Sri Aurobindo, okay, Swami Vivekananda. So they are the philosophers and they are also the great educationists. They have given the concept of education, they have given their ideas that what should be the curriculum in the school, they have given the ideas that what should be or what methods should be used to teach that curriculum, to teach that syllabi. What is the concept of the school, at the same time what is the concept of the teacher and the students, what type of relationship should be maintained, should be established in our education system. So that's why the great educationist, it may be Plato, Dewey, Rousseau, Gandhiji, Sri Aurobindo, Swami Vivekananda, and other philosophers also, they are also great educationists at their time. Then further, education is the dynamic side of the philosophy. It is called as the dynamic side of the philosophy because education uses the principle of philosophy, uses the laws of philosophy and practice it in education system, determine the education aim, then accordingly develop the curriculum and also transact that curriculum. So education is the dynamic side of the philosophy, it's said by John Adams. It is the dynamic side of the philosophy as education translates the ideas of philosophy into action and practice. Philosophy determines the aims of life, whereas education is means to achieve the goal. So one is the aim of life and education is the means, is the tool to achieve the goal of life. Further, now let us focus upon the interrelationships of philosophy and education in various aspects. So here we will be discussing in 4 different aspects, just like philosophy and aims of education, how philosophy determines the aims of education, then interrelationships of philosophy and curriculum, that means how philosophy determines for developing curriculum, for designing curriculum, and further interrelationships between philosophy and methods of teaching. It means how philosophy determines for practicing suitable methods, appropriate methods to teach the students in different subjects, in different content areas and different topics, in different areas of knowledge. And further, interrelationship between teachers and students. So how teachers and students are interrelated with each other and how it is determined by a definite philosophy. So these are the 4 different aspects we will be discussing. Now let us focus upon how philosophy determines the aims of education. Friends, here let me to establish a relationship of aims of education, then aims of our life. Okay, so here you see aims of education are determined as per the aims of our life, and further aims of our life are determined by the philosophy of life or philosophy of our life. So first of all, philosophy is above the concept of aim of life and aim of education. Philosophy determines the aim of life and education determines, or you can say the aim of life determines the aim of education. So aim of philosophy or philosophy of life, then aim of your life and aim of education are interlinked with each other. Aim of education depends upon aim of your life, then aim of your life it depends upon your philosophy of life. Further, when aims of life change, aims of education also change accordingly. You change the aim of your life, then accordingly to achieve those aims you have to practice that type of education. So the nature and scope of education will be different, then accordingly aim of education will also be different. Further, we will be discussing taking certain examples. Then philosophers and educationists in different periods have concerned about the aims of life, and accordingly aims of education have been implemented. Okay. For the aims of life and aims of education in the ancient and modern period of education is different. Friends, you can take the example of the Gurukul system, the education system that was prevailing at the Gurukul system of education or at the ashram education, where the disciples as well as the gurus were staying together, and every day there was verbal communication, verbal interaction between the gurus and the disciples, gurus and the sishyas, and further they were also engaging themselves for gathering their livelihood, and they were also engaging themselves in understanding life, in understanding the nature, and how live one's life, coming contact with the nature. But now in the present system, in the modern system of education, you will find that the aim of education is different. We are now very much interested in practicing the science and technology. Okay, and we are also practicing innovations. We are doing research, and we are doing many new things, many new innovations through the education, through our courses and curriculum. So that's why, friends, it is determined by aim of our life at a different time, and accordingly we set aim of education. Further, philosophy, how philosophy contributes for aims of education, we can give the example. Just like aims of education in various schools of thought are different, such as aims of education as per idealistic schools of thought, aims of education as per naturalistic schools of thought, aims of education as per pragmatic schools of thoughts are different. In idealistic schools of thought, aims of education are based upon the ideas and ideologies, okay, which is very much idealistic in nature. Okay. When we will discuss in our next module about the principles of the idealistic schools of thought, we will discuss detail about it. And aims of education as per the naturalistic schools of thought, it says that nature is everything, and when the individual child come contact with the nature, the child has the ability to learn many things or experience many things by observing the nature, by coming contact with the nature. So accordingly, aim of education is different in comparison to idealistic schools of thoughts and naturalistic schools of thought. And further, aim of education as per pragmatic schools of thought is also different. Pragmatic schools of thought focus upon the dynamism and change. Change is the law of life, change is the law of nature. So that's why nothing is permanent, you can say. Every moment, every time, things are getting changing. So that's why, friends, so far as different philosophy of thought is concerned, different schools of thought is concerned, that determines the aim of education. That means aim of education as per idealistic or naturalistic or pragmatic schools of thought. And further, aims of education are also different in different period of education. I have already given the example of ancient time of education. Further, you can take the example of the medieval period of education, then Buddhist system of education, then modern system of education. Modern system of education can also be made in two parts, just like education system or aim of education at the British time, then aim of education after independence in modern system of education. Okay. So that's why philosophy determines aims of education as per the schools of thought and as per the concepts as per the education system that was prevailing in different time, in different period. Then now let us focus upon philosophy and curriculum. Okay. So how philosophy determines for developing, for designing our curriculum. The aims of education determines from aims of life, accordingly curriculum determines from the aim of education. Just like, let us try to understand with suitable examples. The philosophy of a country or a society is reflected in aims of education, and it is further reflected in curriculum. Just like if philosophy of a country is to make its national self-reliant, By engaging them in the world of work, then the aim of education would be to develop and implement craft and skill based education. Try to understand. Okay. So, here if you want to make the individual, make the citizen self-reliant, self-sufficient, so that's why they should be engaged in different types of work in world of work, and for that we have to design our curriculum where opportunities should be there for craft centered education, skill and competency based education. So, in this way philosophy determines for setting the curriculum. Let us take another example. Just like if the major goal of the country is to transmit and preserve the cultural heritage, so the school curriculum would be to design in such a way to develop a sense of cultural awareness among the students by including it and also by organizing seminars, activities, workshops on culture of the country and so on. Try to understand, if our aim is to transmit our culture, preserve our culture and develop our cultural heritage, then accordingly you have to transact it by using different methods and principles in our curriculum. You have to develop, we have to develop our curriculum in such a way that there should be the opportunity for organizing certain seminars relating to our cultural heritage. There should be opportunity to do certain activities as per our cultural heritage, and also we should involve ourselves in different types of debates, discussions and workshops, symposiums and other types of activities also. Let me to give another example. Here, if the philosophy of the country is to develop science and technology, okay, to cope with the changing need of the society. So, the aim of education and curriculum should be based upon developing scientific temper among the children, among the students, among the learner and among the citizens of the country also, by incorporating inquiry and project based learning, project based education in the curriculum, and further scope may be given to the students to study and acquire skills in these areas. So, unless we incorporate or develop a principle of scientific temper, unless we incorporate inquiry based learning, problem based learning, project based learning, we cannot develop scientific temper, and if we do not develop the scientific temper, then we cannot achieve the aim of education, just like to develop science and technology. So, that is why such skills should be imparted in our curriculum, in our education system for developing scientific temper. Now, let us focus upon philosophy and methods of teaching. Idealist schools of thought suggest traditional methods such as lecture method, which is mostly teacher centered. Naturalistic schools of thought emphasizes self-study method and role of a teacher as a facilitator and guide, which is a laissez-faire in nature. Whereas pragmatic schools emphasizes activity, problem solving and project based method for teaching, which is based upon democratic freedom of the learner. So, three types of philosophy that are being reflected in our method, just like one is teacher centered, other is learner centered, which is mostly laissez-faire in nature, and other is also learner centered, which is democratic in nature. So, that is why in different schools of thought, the methods that they have suggested, so it is reflected from that methods also. The above discussion tries to clarify the philosophy has a deep relation with the methods of the teaching, and further we can say that how there is the relationship between teachers and students. Friends, we can establish teacher and students relationship so far as different you can say philosophy of thought is concerned, different schools of thought is concerned. Just like teacher-student relationship in an idealistic school, teacher-student relationships in a naturalistic school, teacher-student relationships in a pragmatic school, and further teacher-student relationships in different approaches and theories of learning. Try to understand. In an idealistic school, you will find that teacher and students are closely related, and Mostly you will find that teachers, whatever teacher says, whatever you can say knowledge teacher provides to the students or the disciples, they accept it wholeheartedly without asking a question, and they believe that as if it is the true. But so far as naturalistic schools of thought is concerned, the relationship between teacher and students is just like a friend, just like a philosopher. Here teacher provides a way and students proceed in that way by using their own knowledge, own understanding, and they try to construct their own knowledge. And further, so far as a pragmatic schools of thought is concerned, you will find that teacher and students are very much or closely associated with each other, and they feel very free to talk with the teacher, which is not possible maybe in idealistic schools of thought. Further, in different theories of learning and different approaches of learning, if we will give the example of the behavioristic approach of learning or behavioristic theory of learning, then constructivist theory of learning, then cognitivist theory of learning, you will find that the relationships between teacher and student is different. So that's why relationship between teachers and students is determined by different schools of thought, by different philosophy of thought. Now let us recapitulate, and I am just focusing upon some of the questions for your practice. Just like after going through this lesson, I think you are able to answer these questions, just like how philosophy is related with education. Then further, how does philosophy determine aims of education? Then how does philosophy determine curriculum? Then how does philosophy determine methods of teaching? Then you will be able to discuss relationships between teachers and students in different schools of thought. It may be idealistic, naturalistic, or pragmatic schools of thought. And further, critically analyze the relationships between philosophy and education with suitable illustrations, also in different touching upon different aspects, just like aims of education, curriculum, and methods of teaching. Friends, just to recapitulate, today we discussed that how education and philosophy are interrelated with each other, and how philosophy determines for practicing or for determining the aims of education, determining the curriculum, determining the methods of teaching, and establishing a relationships between teacher and students. We have completed the module 5th, and in our next session we will discuss the next module, that is module 6. Thank you.